Hello, welcome to part two of Contemporary Art in Africa. As I stated before, this division of African versus diaspora art is somewhat arbitrary, primarily based on if someone was born in Africa, but that is not the extent of it because someone like Yinka Shinabare, for instance, was born in Africa but moved to the UK. So we're going to keep going, and we're going to discuss Nicholas Lobo and Zanelle Maholi. So here we go. Let me just go ahead and share my screen. Okay, so first off, we're going to start with Nicholas Lobo, who is South African, and he is one of the Xhosa people. And he titles all of his works in his traditional language, as you can see here. Right? So what I'm highlighting are the titles of these pieces. Okay, so those of you who took my class last semester have seen this already, but just bear with me, please. So we're going to take a look at this one and just kind of discuss what we're looking at. Okay, so we have we'll just be looking at the centerpiece here. So we have these balls, these circles that seem to be made of something like leather or rubber, and they have this very prominent pink, looks like it could be a zipper or a seam, okay? So they are somewhat uneven, they're a little lopsided, a little lumpy, and then they have these tendrils that connect up at the top here to something that is oblong, and unfortunately this is a head-on shot, whereas if it were to the side you would see that it is a tube, kind of like this. So we have this pink seam or zipper, we have a leather or rubber material, we have balls that are connected to a tube. Okay, so what could this be? All right, so let's just kind of think through the symbolism of these things. So we are looking at rubber or leather, okay? And these are balls. Okay, so what could this represent? Well, if you were thinking testicles, you're absolutely right. So these are testicles, and they're connected to what you're looking at is, again, head-on, of a penis or a phallic shape. Okay, so what is the significance of the material here? Well, if you think about testicles and penis in combination with leather or rubber, right? Maybe you kind of are starting to think a little bit of the kink community, BDSM, okay? So that is absolutely the right direction. So Nicholas Lobo is gay, and this is very frowned upon in South Africa. It is not allowed. So he is embracing, he is demonstrating his sexual attraction to men with this, and he is using rubber from tires, okay, so he's referencing the kink community. And then what you see, the pink, are actually seams. So he has used a pink ribbon to sew these together. Okay, so think about the implications of sewing, particularly using a feminine color such as pink. All right, so these are things that are traditionally coded as feminine, right? Women's work, as it were. And so he is not only discussing desire and eroticism for him as a man looking at other men, he is also breaking gender norms by looking at sewing, by practicing sewing, by using feminine colors for sewing, etc. Okay, so he's really breaking a lot of bounds here. So let's take a look at some of his other works. So he is particularly known for his use of sewing, as we mentioned, and his use of things like rubber, orifices. So a lot of his work is actually rather sexual in nature, even though it is this beautiful abstract. So he really delights in making these puncture wounds, these holes, these orifices. So there's a lot of discussion of his sexuality in a work such as this. Okay, so you have sewing, which again is women's work. So he's breaking gender norms. He is he's using this technique where he's punching these holes. Okay, so he's referencing not only things like orifices, which have sexual implications, but also puncturing and wounding and bleeding and kind of oozing. So this is a very earthy sort of work where he's in touch with more perhaps scatological elements of the human body. He's not just glorifying the human body, he's looking at everything that it produces, its byproducts, etc. So he's also very focused on things like burdens and the burden of the human body, the burden of sexuality, etc. And I just really like his work. I really like the sewing and the intricacy. You can see, again, right, the incorporation of sewing, but also rubber. And he has these very meandering, sort of wandering um, trails that he kind of follows with his work. Okay, and you can see that in these various works. So this is the piece that we looked at in the beginning, the testicles, this coat with this burden on its back, right? Humanity, etc. And he makes these very map-like figures. He makes very humanoid figures that are completely encased in rubber and ribbons, okay? So he created a work that in English is called All the Lightning Birds Are After Me. And this was for a Venice Biennale. And you can see that it's this massive kind of menacing work. But he's incorporating feminine objects, also found objects, as you can see with the skull. Some of the rubber comes from tires of trucks, how they have the blowouts, etc. So he is using all these found materials to kind of make this sort of menacing mythology here that you're seeing in All the Lightning Birds Are After Me. Okay, again, a lot of humanoid figures, etc. And then this is a corral. So this would be where you would keep cattle. You would make this sort of wall out of sticks and it would keep the cattle within. And then he's woven pink ribbons together to create this kind of covering, this protective sort of element to this piece. Okay, so some performance pieces, etc. So that is, apologize, Nicholas Lobo. So let me, I am not doing so hot here, sorry, bear with me for just 1 second. Here we go. All right, so the other artist that I want to show you today is Zanele Muholi. So she is a photographer and she is actually also South African. She is a lesbian, which, as with Nicholas Lobo, is noteworthy because it is such a taboo subject, such a taboo activity to engage in. Okay, so, and this is actually rather disturbing. In South Africa, many women do not publicly identify as lesbians because it is actually dangerous for them. They are persecuted, and lesbians are often subjected to what is known as curative rape, which is the idea that if a man were to rape them, it would rid them of their um, homosexuality and they would no longer be a lesbian. So there is violent there are violent repercussions to being a lesbian in South Africa. And so Zanel captures photographs of these women who are vocal, who are open about their sexuality, their sexual preference, etc. And this is again noteworthy because this is dangerous. Zanel is also a lesbian. She has had her house broken into. And her work has been stolen, her cameras destroyed. So this is something that causes a lot of um, emotional reaction to her work. But again, this is an example of agency. So these women are portraying agency in how they are depicted. Okay, so they are choosing not to portray themselves as feminine. They're choosing not to portray themselves as victims, but they're strong, they are proud, they're defiant of the society that would dominate them. Okay, so this is actually a self-portrait of Zanel, but she gives these subjects their dignity. All right, so we're going to be talking more about the concept of agency and choosing how you are depicted. So for many, in situations where they are um, less powerful than those around them, or where they are perhaps being oppressed, how you choose to depict yourself is one real act of agency that is available to you. So even if you are not necessarily in control of your situation, which I'm not saying that these women are, but in the future we're going to be looking at people who are in situations like that. This way of being depicted is a way of asserting your own identity and your own power over your future. Okay, so these are actually really strong statements that these pictures are making, even though they seem to be nothing more than a simple black and white photograph. Okay, so you can see that these are actually quite meaningful, and there's a lot going on behind these, behind the surface. All right, so hopefully that gives you a little bit of an idea of the work that is coming from South Africa. Okay, so you have people who are strongly identifying with various parts of themselves. They're focusing on identity. We have a reading next week that looks at identity and its importance in contemporary art. Many of the works that we look at in this class do in fact tie in with identity issues. So some of the artists that we didn't get a chance to look at last week, such as Kehinde Wiley. Actually, let me share my screen again. That was premature, sorry. So some of you are familiar with Kehinde Wiley. This is the piece that is in the DIA. Hopefully y'all had a chance to see it before the DIA was closed, but you can also go there once it reopens. And these are huge pieces, right? And so this is an example of identity, but also agency for these subjects. So Kehinde Wiley is an African-American artist, and he takes works, masterworks as they were, from the history of art, and he remakes them into contemporary versions. Okay, so this is called The Officer of the Hussars. So let's look for that title. Okay, so bear with me here. Okay, so this is an example of the work that Kehinde Wiley is referencing in the piece at the DIA. So do you see how we have this horse, we have this man, this officer who is ready for battle. He's on the battlefield, he's in a very heroic pose. This is an equestrian portrait. okay? But think back to the history of art. Who is typically depicted in the images that we have from the 15th and 16th and 17th and 18th, even the 19th century, right? We typically see people depicted who would have had the money to purchase the art, okay? So the portraits are almost all, not entirely, but almost all going to be of wealthy white individuals, okay? So Kehinde Wiley takes this narrative and he flips it on its head. And what he does is he identifies people in the street, Black people who interest him, who he would like to depict in his paintings. And he asks them if they would be a subject for a painting. And then once they agree, he takes them to his studio and lets them select from various art history books what image they want to enact, okay? So he does not choose for his subjects what they will look like. The subjects themselves choose, okay? So once again, we're looking at the concept of agency and identity. All right, so you have this depiction of an African American man who's wearing just casual, everyday clothing. He has tattoos, but he's holding the sword, like in the Jericho piece. Okay, he's on the horse, as in the Jericho piece, and he's very dignified. He is asserting himself. He's looking straight at the viewer. Okay, so um, there's no diminishing of this person. These are pretty much life size, I believe. Yeah, so it's 9 foot by 9 foot, so about life size. And then Kehinde Wiley combines this image from art history, with this very decorative, flattened background, almost like a wallpaper. Okay, so Kehinde Wiley is most famous of late for his depiction of um, Barack Obama. Okay, he was the artist who Barack selected to paint him after his presidency was over. And he shows Barack Obama in this very lush, this very fertile garden-like area. And Obama is almost being subsumed by these leaves. They're almost coming forward and enveloping him. This is an incredibly popular portrait, and Kehinde Wiley has become even more famous since he painted that. So you can see, right, there's a lot going on here. Hopefully y'all can recognize some of this. So this is called the Lamentation over the Dead Christ. Okay, now this is actually based on a 15th century painting by Mantegna. So let's see, here it is. So this is called The Dead Christ and the Three Mourners. It's from 1470s. And at the time this was painted, this was quite revolutionary for the level of foreshortening. So it would have been quite unusual to see Christ depicted in this way and at this angle. Okay, very revolutionary. And Kehinde Wiley is also doing something revolutionary. So he has chosen to depict the Christ as a Black man wearing contemporary clothing. Okay, so just think about all the depictions of Christ that you have seen throughout history in your art history class, etc. And how the commonality of most of those is that they depict a white man, right? And so Kehinde Wiley is breaking with this by depicting someone who is contemporary and who is not white, okay? So that's just to show you just a little bit about how these issues are overarching. So they are present in Africa, this concept of agency and identity. They are present in America and the UK, etc. So there are a lot of global issues that are being addressed by artists nowadays. And we will get to talk a little bit more about this next week. So I hope y'all are doing well and staying safe, and I'll talk to you soon. Okay, bye.